The night of pregnant, Maid was mocked over 5 crumpled dollar bills. No one in the cafe realized they were watching fate rearrange itself. They laughed at her trembling smile, unaware an immortal predator was quietly deciding who would suffer and who would be saved. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're really glad to have you here. Before we get started, take a quick moment to say hello in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. I'd love to see where everyone is tuning in from, what city, state, or country you're joining us from today. Feel free to introduce yourself as well. And if you're watching live or on replay, let us know that too. Go ahead and drop in the chat. And once again, welcome. We're excited to have you here. Evelyn Carter learned early that silence was a kind of armor. In a city that roared with ambition and glittered with money she would never touch, silence kept her safe. It kept her employed. It kept her invisible. At 7 months pregnant, invisibility felt like mercy. Her swollen feet ached as she polished the marble floors of the Blackthorn mansion, the limestone walls glowing faintly in the late afternoon sun, filtering through hand-carved windows older than most of Manhattan's skyscrapers. The mansion breathed history. You could feel it in the quiet, in the way sounds softened as if afraid to echo too loudly. Evelyn often wondered how many secrets were trapped in the walls, how many lives had passed through these halls without leaving fingerprints behind. She knew better than to ask questions. In this house, questions were unnecessary. Everything you needed to know revealed itself if you paid attention. And Luca Blackthorn always paid attention. She first noticed it during her interview. Not the way his pale blue eyes lingered. Rich men always stared, but the way they measured. As if he could see the precise weight of exhaustion on her shoulders, the careful way she hid nausea behind steady breathing, the faint tremor in her hands when she signed the employment contract. He hadn't commented on her pregnancy. He hadn't asked about her past. He had simply nodded and said, "Kindness ages well. You'll do fine here." That had been 3 months ago. Now, as Evelyn adjusted a crystal chandelier worth more than her entire upbringing, she thought about the phone call she'd taken earlier that day. Her sister's voice still echoed in her head, bright and relentless. "You can't keep hiding, Evie. You deserve love too, not just scrubbing billionaire bathrooms." The laugh Evelyn had forced out still tasted sour. She hadn't told her sister about the baby's father disappearing the moment fear outweighed affection. She hadn't mentioned the bills stacked neatly under her mattress. She certainly hadn't admitted that loneliness hurt worse at night, when even exhaustion couldn't quiet it. So her sister said blind date. Evelyn had said yes, mostly because the cafe offered a free dessert. She finished her shift as the sky turned amber, changed into a borrowed dress in the staff restroom, and carefully counted the contents of her purse. $5 for wrinkled bills and a coin. Enough for the subway home if things went badly. Enough, she told herself, to get through an evening pretending to be someone who belonged. She didn't notice Luca watching from the second-floor balcony as she left. Luca Blackthorn stood perfectly still, hands folded behind his back, listening to the cadence of Evelyn's footsteps fade down the gravel drive. He had heard the phone call too. Every word, every laugh that masked uncertainty. The centuries had taught him many things, but one lesson endured. Fate often whispered before it screamed. Something about tonight scraped against instincts forged long before electricity, before currency, before names like Manhattan existed. He told himself he was curious. He told himself it was coincidence when he reached for his coat. The cafe in Soho glowed with curated intimacy, soft lighting, exposed brick, music engineered to feel spontaneous. Evelyn arrived 10 minutes early and chose a small table near the window, easing herself into the chair with care. The baby shifted, a gentle reminder of responsibility pressing against her ribs. She ordered water. She practiced smiling. Her date arrived 20 minutes late. He didn't apologize. He didn't smile. His eyes swept over her like an itemized bill, pausing at her stomach with open disbelief. The silence stretched until Evelyn felt compelled to fill it. "Hi, I'm Evelyn." He snorted softly. Didn't realize this was that kind of situation. She followed his gaze and felt heat flood her face. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, as if stating a flaw. "I can see that." He slid into the chair without invitation. "You didn't mention it." "I wasn't asked." The waiter approached, oblivious. "Can I start you off with?" He waved the man away, eyes still on Evelyn. "Let's not waste time. You got money." Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me." "For the bill." He leaned back, arms crossed. "I don't do charity cases." Her fingers curled instinctively around her purse. "I have $5, she said, voice barely above the music. "For the subway." Laughter burst from him, sharp and uncontained. Heads turned. The waiter froze mid-step. $5. He shook his head, amused. "What are you planning to buy, a napkin?" Evelyn's ears burned. She forced a smile she had perfected over years of service. "I wasn't planning to buy anything. I just wanted to meet." He stood abruptly, reaching into his wallet. 5 singles fluttered onto the table like an insult given form. "Here, for your troubles." The cafe felt suddenly too loud, too quiet, too full of eyes. Evelyn's throat tightened. She swallowed humiliation like medicine and nodded. "Thank you." That was when the temperature dropped. The door opened without a sound anyone noticed. Luca entered as if the space itself made room for him. His presence shifted the air, subtle but undeniable, like pressure before a storm. He took in the scene instantly. The man standing smugly, the bills on the table, Evelyn's hands folded protectively over her belly. He walked toward them, footsteps unhurried. The man turned just as Luca reached the table. "Hey, buddy, this is private." Luca picked up the $5, examined them with mild curiosity, then smiled. It was a small smile. Controlled. Dangerous. "Interesting," he said softly. "In my country, this amount once bought a human life." The man's color drained. "What the hell are you talking about?" Luca placed 5 black Amex cards on the table, their edges aligned with surgical precision. "I'm talking about value. Something you clearly misunderstand." He glanced at the waiter. "I'll cover every table and add 5,000 for the inconvenience." The cafe exhaled collectively. Luca turned to Evelyn. "You are worth far more than this room." I'm sorry," she began, reflexively apologizing for existing. "Never apologize for surviving," Luca said gently. The man backed away, mumbling excuses no one listened to. Evelyn stared at Luca, stunned. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, unaware that something ancient had shifted course. As Luca escorted Evelyn out into the night, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Hope. And Luca, watching her carefully, realized the same thing with quiet certainty. Nothing about this was accidental. Evelyn slept poorly that night, the city's distant sirens threading through her dreams like loose stitches. Every time she drifted off, she saw 5 crumpled dollar bills floating down like wilted leaves. Then Luca's calm blue eyes cutting through the scene, steady and impossible. When morning came, gray light slipped through the narrow window of her modest apartment in Queens, and reality returned with its familiar weight. Her back ached as she sat up. The baby shifted, a slow, reassuring roll beneath her palm. "We're okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she meant herself or the child. The memory of the cafe still made her chest tighten. Not just the humiliation, but the way Luca had appeared as if summoned by something older than chance. Rich men didn't intervene like that. They didn't notice. And yet he had noticed everything. She dressed carefully, choosing her usual uniform, smoothing wrinkles that never fully disappeared. On the subway ride to Manhattan, she caught her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, soft mouth, a woman carrying more than she could afford. Across from her, a teenager scrolled through his phone, laughing at something Evelyn couldn't hear. Life moved forward relentlessly, indifferent to small mercies. The Blackthorn mansion greeted her with its familiar hush. The iron gates opened soundlessly, and gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she crossed the drive. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. Other staff moved quietly through the halls, nodding and greeting but never lingering. No one spoke of personal lives here. The mansion was a place where past dissolved and only performance mattered. Evelyn had just begun dusting the East Wing gallery when she sensed him. Lucas stood at the far end of the corridor, hands clasped behind his back, gaze resting on a centuries-old oil painting as if it were alive. He turned before she spoke, eyes settling on her with unsettling precision. "You're early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," Evelyn replied before she could stop herself. Embarrassed, she lowered her gaze. Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Evelyn." His voice carried no judgment. "Did you enjoy your dessert?" Her breath caught. He knew. Of course he knew. "I didn't stay," she admitted. "But thank you." For last night, Luca studied her, not as a benefactor might, but as something closer to a witness. "Gratitude is unnecessary," he said. "Dignity is not a gift. It's a right." The words settled into her slowly, unfamiliar and warm. "Still," she said, "it mattered." "Yes," Luca agreed quietly. "It did." He gestured toward the window overlooking Central Park, its autumn colors just beginning to bloom. "Walk with me." Evelyn hesitated only a moment before following. They moved through the gallery, their footsteps echoing softly. She was acutely aware of the space between them. How safe it felt, how strange that was. No one had asked her how she felt since the pregnancy began. No one except her sister, whose concern always came wrapped in panic. "You were humiliated," Lucas said suddenly. Evelyn stiffened. "I'm used to it." "That," he replied, "is what troubles me." They stopped near the window. Sunlight traced the sharp lines of his face, catching briefly in his eyes. For a moment, he looked less like a man and more like a statue carved to resemble one. "People like him thrive because others stay silent," he continued. "They assume no consequences." Evelyn swallowed. "I didn't want trouble. And yet trouble found you," Lucas said gently. "Do you believe he deserved mercy?" The question startled her. She thought of the man's laughter, the way he'd looked at her stomach like a joke. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just wanted to go home." Lucas' lips curved faintly. An understandable desire. He turned away, as if dismissing the subject, but Evelyn sensed something unresolved beneath his calm. She returned to her work, though her hands shook slightly. Throughout the morning, she felt his presence like a current, sometimes distant, sometimes close enough to raise the hairs on her arms. At midday, the housekeeper informed Evelyn she was to have lunch in the staff dining room. Instead, she found herself guided to a small sunlit sitting room near the conservatory. A tray waited on the table. Fresh fruit, soup, bread still warm. "I didn't order this," Evelyn said. "I did," Luca replied from the doorway. Her instincts screamed protest. "Sir, that's not necessary." "I can't, you can," he interrupted, not unkindly. "Sit." She obeyed, heart racing. As she ate, Luca remained standing, watching the garden beyond the glass. Vines twisted lazily along trellises, their leaves heavy with age. "Do you know why I hired you?" he asked. "No," Evelyn said. "I assumed. I was available." Luca turned, amusement flickering briefly. "You were exhausted, pregnant, underqualified on paper, and still showed up early." He met her eyes. "That suggests character." Her throat tightened. Praise felt dangerous, like something that might vanish if she reached for it. "I just needed the job." "And yet," he said, "you treated this house as if it mattered." The baby kicked, sudden and strong. Evelyn laughed despite herself, pressing a hand to her stomach. "He's restless today." "He?" Luca echoed. "I think so," she said. "I don't know for sure." Luca's expression softened in a way she couldn't quite explain. "He will be strong." The words resonated strangely, as if spoken with certainty rather than hope. That afternoon, news traveled quietly through the staff. Whispers in corners, glances exchanged. The story of the cafe had spread, embellished, distorted, but unmistakable. Some spoke with awe, others with envy, a few with suspicion. Evelyn felt eyes on her as she passed, felt the weight of being seen when she'd spent her life avoiding it. Later, as she cleaned the library, her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. Saw a post online. "Was that you? Who is that man?" Evelyn stared at the screen. Someone had filmed it. Of course they had. In a city like New York, nothing stayed private. The thought made her stomach churn. She typed back slowly, "I'm okay. Please don't worry." Across the room, Luca stood silently, having entered without sound. He glanced at the phone, then away. "Fame is a parasite," he said. "It feeds whether you consent or not." "I don't want attention," Evelyn said quickly. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Luca replied, "but others will decide what story they prefer." She thought of the man from the cafe, of people like him, already shaping narratives that painted her as foolish, desperate, unworthy. Anger flickered, small, unfamiliar, but real. "Is that fair?" she asked. Luca's smile was thin. "Fairness is a human invention," he said. "Justice is something else entirely." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, Evelyn, do you believe people like him should be allowed to walk away unchanged?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Somewhere in the mansion, a clock chimed the hour, each note echoing like a heartbeat. Outside, the city rushed on, oblivious. Inside, Evelyn felt the first stirrings of something dangerous. Not fear, resolve. The morning headlines did not use Evelyn's name, but she recognized herself immediately. A shaky phone video had gone viral overnight. The angle was bad, the sound distorted, but the moment was unmistakable. The laughter, the tossed bills, the way her shoulders had tightened as if bracing for impact. Comment sections bloomed like infections. Some mocked her. Some questioned her choices. A few defended her, but they were drowned out by louder, uglier voices. Gold digger. Should have stayed home. Why was she even there? Evelyn closed the browser with trembling fingers. Her reflection in the dark screen looked smaller than usual. She rested a hand on her belly, grounding herself in the quiet certainty of the life inside her. "We're okay," she whispered again, though the words felt thinner today. At the mansion, the air had changed. Not dramatically. No alarms or raised voices, but subtly, like a shift in weather pressure. Staff spoke more quietly. Footsteps avoided certain corridors. The housekeeper's smile faltered when she saw Evelyn, then returned too quickly, too brightly. In the grand dining room, Luca Blackthorne sat alone at the head of the table, a porcelain cup untouched before him. He had been awake for hours. He had watched the video spread across screens in 1,000 different rooms, heard the commentary in 100 languages. He had cataloged every face that sneered, every voice that laughed. He had also made a list. When Evelyn entered, Luca rose, not abruptly, but with deliberate courtesy. "Good morning," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. "Good morning, sir." "Come," he said. "Sit." She obeyed, heart hammering. "I'm sorry about all of this," she began, gesturing vaguely, as if the world's cruelty were a spill she'd caused. Luca's eyes hardened for a fraction of a second. "You did nothing," he said. "The mistake was theirs." He slid a tablet across the table. On it was the pause video, comments scrolling endlessly beneath. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. "A mess," Evelyn said softly. "It's a mirror," Luca replied. "People reveal themselves when they think no one is watching." She studied the screen. "They don't know me." "They don't need to," he said. "Cruelty doesn't require familiarity, only permission." Evelyn looked up. "What will happen?" "That depends," Lucas said, "on what you want." The question startled her. No one had asked her that since before the pregnancy. Since before survival had narrowed her choices to what was necessary. "I want peace," she said slowly. "I want my child to grow up safe. I want to work, to live, without being laughed at." Luca considered her carefully. "Those are reasonable desires." "And them?" she asked, nodding at the tablet. "The ones who think this is entertainment?" A long pause followed. Luca set the tablet aside. "Justice," he said, "is not always loud. Sometimes it is precise." That afternoon, Lucas summoned his legal team, not to threaten lawsuits or issue statements. Those were human theatrics. Instead, quiet inquiries were made. Employment histories examined. Patterns noted. The man from the cafe, his name was Julian Mercer, was identified quickly. A mid-level consultant with a fragile reputation and a habit of humiliating women he deemed inferior. Julian, unaware of the net tightening around him, gave an interview to a local blog. He laughed about the incident, called it a misunderstanding. "People are too sensitive," he said. "If you can't handle a joke, don't date." The comments under the article exploded. "If you believe people like Julian are just joking," Luca thought coldly, "you deserve what comes next." Evelyn saw the interview later that evening. Her hands shook with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "He's proud," she whispered. "Yes," Lucas said, "and pride invites lessons." Days passed. The mansion became both refuge and crucible. Evelyn's routine remained the same: cleaning, organizing, caring, but something inside her shifted. She stood a little straighter. She met eyes instead of avoiding them. When whispers followed her down corridors, she didn't flinch. One afternoon, a junior staff member muttered under her breath, "Some people get special treatment." Evelyn paused, turned, and met the woman's gaze. "Some people get caught," she said calmly. The woman flushed and looked away. That night, Luca invited Evelyn to the conservatory. Moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, illuminating rare orchids that bloomed only once a decade. The air hummed with restrained power. "Julian Mercer will be terminated tomorrow," Lucas said. His firm discovered irregularities. His sponsors withdrew support. His reputation will not recover. Evelyn's breath caught. "You did that." "I allowed consequences to occur," Luca replied. "There is a difference." She absorbed this in silence. "Will he know why?" "He will suspect," Lucas said. "But suspicion is a poor shield." Evelyn felt a strange mix of relief and unease. "Is it wrong," she asked, "to feel satisfied?" Lucas' gaze softened. "No," he said. "It is human." She laughed quietly, a sound edged with disbelief. "I've spent my whole life being told to be grateful for scraps. For $5. And now?" Luca prompted. "And now," she said, voice steady, "I don't want to apologize anymore." Lucas smiled. Not the polite curve he offered the world, but something older, warmer. "Good." Outside the mansion, the city continued its endless churn. Somewhere, Julian Mercer refreshed his email, dread creeping in as silence replaced praise. Somewhere else, strangers argued online, choosing sides, revealing themselves with every comment. And in the glass-lit conservatory, a pregnant maid stood beside an immortal, no longer invisible. "If you believe people like Julian deserve consequences," Luca thought, "then stand where you're seen. Only those who side with cruelty stay silent." Evelyn placed a hand over her heart, feeling its steady rhythm. For the first time since the cafe, she wasn't ashamed of being seen. She was ready for whatever came next. The first letter arrived on thick cream paper, embossed with a law firm's insignia Evelyn didn't recognize. It was forwarded to the mansion by mistake, addressed to her Queens apartment, but rerouted by a postal clerk who'd recognized the name after seeing the video. Evelyn stared at it for a long time before opening it, her thumb worrying the edge as if it might bite. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even an apology. It was a request. Julian Mercer wished to clarify the misunderstanding and proposed a private conversation to restore reputations on both sides. He suggested a neutral location. He ended with a line that made Evelyn's jaw tighten. "I'm sure we could be reasonable adults about this." Reasonable adults. As if reason had been present when he laughed at her belly and tossed money like crumbs. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. When she looked up, Luca was already there, leaning against the library's carved oak doorframe, watching her with an expression that was neither anger nor amusement, but assessment. "He wants to talk," she said. "Yes," Luca replied. "He wants control." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "What do I do?" "That," Luca said, stepping closer, "depends on what you want the world to learn." The days that followed felt like standing in the eye of storm. Outside the mansion, the city churned with opinion. Inside, the rhythm of life continued. Meals prepared, floors polished, curtains drawn at dusk. Yet beneath the routine ran a taut wire of anticipation. Staff members checked their phones more often. Some avoided Evelyn entirely. Others offered smiles that were too eager, too late. One afternoon, as Evelyn folded linens in the West Wing, the housekeeper cleared her throat. "You're handling this well," she said. Evelyn didn't look up. "I'm handling my job." The woman hesitated, then nodded, as if chastened by the simplicity of the answer. Luca watched these interactions with quiet interest. He had lived long enough to recognize shifts in power when they occurred, the subtle recalibrations of respect. Humans, he knew, often mistook loud dominance for strength. Real power moved differently. It waited. It listened. It chose its moment. Julian's moment arrived on a Friday evening. He had chosen a restaurant in Midtown, sleek, expensive, designed to impress without revealing insecurity. Evelyn agreed to attend under one condition. Luca would be present, though not at the table. Julian agreed, assuming Luca was merely a wealthy acquaintance eager to protect his employee. He underestimated the situation. That was his habit. Evelyn wore a simple dress, tailored now to accommodate her pregnancy with grace rather than apology. When she entered the restaurant, conversations dipped, then resumed. Recognition sparked in a few eyes. Phones were discreetly angled. The city, ever hungry, leaned in. Julian stood to greet her, smile practiced. "Evelyn," he said, as if tasting the name. "Thank you for coming." She sat without returning the smile. "Say what you need to say." He laughed lightly. "Straight to business." "I respect that." He leaned forward. "Look, things got blown out of proportion. People online, they don't know the full story." "Neither did you," Evelyn replied calmly. His smile tightened. "I'm willing to apologize publicly. Maybe even set up a fund. Something for single mothers." There it was. Charity as a muzzle. "I don't want your pity," Evelyn said. "I want accountability." Julian's eyes flicked around the room. "Let's be realistic. You've gained from this too. Attention. Opportunities." Across the room, Lucas sat at the bar, untouched drink before him, gaze fixed on Julian with predatory patience. Evelyn felt the baby shift, a steadying presence. "You humiliated me," she said. "You laughed. You threw money at me like I was nothing." Julian shrugged. "It was a joke." "If you think humiliating someone is a joke," Evelyn said, voice carrying just enough to draw glances, "then you're the punchline." A murmur rippled through nearby tables. Someone whispered her name. Julian's face reddened. "Careful," he hissed. "You don't want to push this." Evelyn stood. "I didn't come to negotiate," she said. "I came to tell you that I won't be quiet anymore." She turned to leave. Julian grabbed her wrist. The room froze. Before anyone could react, Luca was there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply placed a hand on Julian's shoulder, fingers tightening within human strength. "Let go," Lucas said softly. Julian did. The silence that followed was complete, reverent. Luca met Julian's eyes, centuries of consequence distilled into a single look. "You had a chance to learn," he said. "You chose spectacle instead." Julian stumbled back, fear finally eclipsing arrogance. Phones were no longer discreet. The story would spread again, but this time the image was different. A man exposed, shrinking. Evelyn walked out, heart pounding, Luca beside her. Outside, the night air felt electric. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked quietly. Luca considered her. "You did the honest thing," he said. "That matters more." By morning, the footage was everywhere. The comments shifted. Support swelled. So did backlash. Trolls crawled out, accusing Evelyn of manipulation, of using her pregnancy as leverage. Luca read every word, cataloging the names. "If you side with people who grab wrists and call cruelty a joke," he thought, "then reveal yourselves." History remembers choices. Evelyn didn't read the comments. She sat in the conservatory, sunlight warming her skin, hand on her belly, breathing through waves of emotion. For the first time, she felt something close to victory. Not because Julian had fallen, but because she had stood. And Luca, watching her from the shadows, knew the transformation had begun. The backlash arrived the way storms always did, suddenly, loudly, and with no concern for collateral damage. By Monday morning, Evelyn's name was everywhere. Some called her brave. Others called her calculated. A few dug into her past with the enthusiasm of scavengers. pulling at fragments of her life as if hardship were evidence of guilt. Why was she working there? Who was the father? How convenient that a billionaire stepped in. Evelyn tried not to read, but the noise seeped through anyway, through overheard conversations, through the careful pauses staff made when she entered a room, through the way her sister's voice shook on the phone. "They're saying awful things, Evie," her sister said. "You don't deserve this." Evelyn closed her eyes. "I know. You can come stay with me," her sister offered. "Just until things calm down." Evelyn glanced around her small apartment. The peeling paint, the secondhand couch, the stack of baby supplies she'd been slowly collecting. "I'm okay," she said, surprising herself with how true it felt. At the mansion, Luca watched the digital chaos unfold with ancient detachment. He had seen empires rise and fall over rumors far less potent than shame. What fascinated him was not the cruelty. It was predictable, but Evelyn's response. She still came to work early. She still did her job with care, but she no longer shrank. When a guest stared too long, she met their eyes. When whispers followed her down corridors, she didn't quicken her pace. The baby, as if sensing the shift, moved often, grounding her in something real when the world felt unreal. One afternoon, Luca found her in the West Garden, seated on a stone bench, hands resting on her belly. Autumn leaves drifted lazily around her. "You're becoming a symbol," Luca said, taking the seat beside her. Evelyn sighed. "I never asked for that." "No one ever does," he replied. "Symbols are born when systems crack." She considered that. "People want me to be either a saint or a scam," she said. "There's no room for just a person." Luca turned to her. "Then we will make room." He explained his plan slowly, carefully, not as an order, but an option, a foundation, not bearing his name nor hers. A quiet structure designed to provide legal and financial support to women humiliated or exploited in public spaces. No press conferences, no spectacle. "Why me?" Evelyn asked. "Because you understand the cost," Lucas said, "and because you don't want revenge." She thought of Julian's face when fear finally reached him. "I won't lie," she said. "Part of me wanted him to hurt. And yet," Lucas said gently, "you chose dignity." That night, Evelyn dreamed of standing in a room full of women, their faces blurred, their hands reaching toward her. She woke with tears on her cheeks and resolve in her chest. The foundation launched quietly 2 weeks later. It took less than a day to make noise. Emails poured in. Messages. Stories. Women who'd been mocked, recorded, exposed. Some pregnant. Some broke. Some simply tired of being treated as entertainment. Evelyn read them late into the night, heart aching and expanding all at once. She wasn't alone. Neither were they. Julian Mercer resurfaced briefly, posting a rant about cancel culture and false narratives. The response was swift and merciless. His supporters dwindled. His words rang hollow. "If you think men like Julian deserve platforms more than accountability," the comments seemed to say, "then say it with your chest." Evelyn watched from a distance, no longer needing the outcome to define her. One evening, as she reviewed messages in the conservatory, a sharp pain rippled through her lower back. She froze, breath hitching. "Luca," she called softly. He was at her side instantly. "It's time," he said, certainty replacing calm. Panic fluttered, but it was edged with awe. "Already?" "Yes," Luca replied, "and you will not be alone." As they moved toward the waiting car, Evelyn felt fear, but not the hollow fear of humiliation. This was different. This was change arriving at full force. And for the first time in her life, she was ready to meet it. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and rain-soaked coats. Outside, the city thundered with late-night traffic, but inside the delivery wing time fractured into sharp breaths and endless seconds. Evelyn gripped the side of the bed, knuckles white, pain rolling through her in waves that stole language and replaced it with instinct. "Breathe," the nurse said gently. "You're doing great." Evelyn wanted to laugh at that. Great felt like a myth. But then she felt Luca's presence, steady, anchoring, standing just beyond the curtain, close enough that she could sense him without seeing him. He hadn't crossed the line she'd set. He hadn't tried to control the moment. He simply stayed. That mattered more than she could explain. Between contractions, her mind drifted back to the cafe, to the laughter, to the $5. Back to the night, she'd almost folded herself smaller, just to disappear. It struck her then, with startling clarity, that this pain was nothing like that humiliation. This pain had purpose. This pain built something. When the final moment came, it arrived like a breaking wave. A cry filled the room, sharp, furious, alive. The nurse smiled wide. "He's here," Evelyn sobbed as they placed her son in her arms. He was warm and slippery and impossibly real, his tiny face scrunched in indignation at the world. She laughed through tears, pressing her forehead to his. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm your mom." Outside the curtain, Luca closed his eyes. He had witnessed births across centuries, royal heirs, hidden lineages, children born into war and into wealth. But this moment pierced him in a way he hadn't expected. Perhaps because this child was born not into power, but into earned dignity. Perhaps because his mother had chosen courage when silence would have been easier. When Evelyn finally slept, exhaustion pulling her under, Luca stood at the window overlooking the city. The lights glittered like a galaxy turned inside out. Somewhere out there, people still argued. Trolls still typed. Cruelty still masqueraded as humor. And yet, a nurse approached him hesitantly. "Sir?" She asked if you'd like to see him. Luca nodded once. The baby lay swaddled in white, fists clenched, eyes fluttering. Luca felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. He did not touch the child. He knew better, but he leaned close, studying the tiny features with reverence. "Welcome," he murmured. "You are already loved." In the days that followed, the world tried to reclaim its noise. Reporters caught wind of the birth. Speculation flared again about Luca, about the foundation, about Evelyn's future. Some praised. Some poisoned the well with insinuations. Evelyn read none of it. She focused on the weight of her son in her arms, the rhythm of feeding and sleep, the quiet power of choosing what mattered. Luca arranged for privacy without spectacle, for security without fear. He visited rarely, always announced, always respectful. One afternoon, as autumn light streamed through the hospital window, Evelyn broke the silence. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked. Luca considered the question. "Of time," he said. "Often." "Of purpose?" "No." She smiled. "Good. Because I'm not done." He met her gaze. "Neither am I." Outside, a new comment trend surged. People arguing about whether Evelyn deserved what she'd received. The cruelty revealed itself again, loud and proud. If you believe tearing down a new mother is acceptable, Luca thought, then don't pretend you stand for fairness. And if you don't side with that ugliness, if you believe dignity isn't negotiable, then be counted. Evelyn looked down at her son, fingers curled around hers, and felt something settle into place. The world hadn't become kinder. She had become stronger, and that changed everything. The first night in the new penthouse overlooking Central Park was surreal. Evelyn stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights scattering like diamonds across the dark water of the reservoir, and cradled her son, Jonah, in her arms. The space was enormous, filled with art she didn't yet understand and furniture too expensive to touch without hesitation. But she didn't care. She only cared that here, for the first time, she was safe. Truly safe. Luca had arranged everything quietly. Medical bills paid in full, security discreetly installed, and her son's nursery prepared with care that bordered on obsession. He had even hired a private chef for the first month, so she wouldn't have to worry about anything beyond feeding herself and her child. She was struck again by the contrast. A woman who had once been mocked for $5 now lived in a space many dreamed of for a lifetime. Yet, despite the luxury, Evelyn felt vulnerable. The city beyond the glass was still alive with noise, indifferent and sometimes cruel. She remembered Julian Mercer's face, his arrogance, the way he had tried to reduce her to a joke. She shivered. The foundation Luca had helped her establish had already begun to see inquiries and stories from women who had suffered similar humiliation, but the world outside remained unpredictable. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, and Luca entered, moving with that familiar, silent grace that made the air feel heavier around him. His black suit was impeccably tailored, the kind that seemed effortless yet impossible to replicate. He carried nothing. He simply watched, as if weighing her in his mind. "Are you settling in?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, though the truth was more complicated. She was grateful, relieved, and terrified all at once. "But it's a lot." "You are strong," Lucas said, stepping closer, "and you will learn to inhabit this strength." Evelyn smiled faintly, then set Jonah down in his crib. His tiny hands grasped at the soft blanket, and she felt a surge of protectiveness she hadn't known she could feel. "He's amazing," she whispered. "He will be," Luca replied softly, "because he is born into love, not fear." For the first time, Evelyn felt the weight of the future pressing on her, not as threat, but as possibility. She thought about the foundation again and the women who had reached out. Their voices, raw and fragile, carried through her mind, reminding her that what she had endured was not unique. What she had done, choosing dignity over silence, had given them courage, whether they knew it yet or not. The next morning, Lucas suggested they take a walk through Central Park. It was unusual for him to involve himself so casually in her life, but he had insisted. He walked beside her silently, hands in his pockets, the crisp winter air carrying a tang of distant snow and city smoke. Jonah was bundled warmly against her chest, eyes bright and curious as he observed the park. "Do you ever regret intervening?" Evelyn asked, breaking the silence. "Never," Lucas said simply. "Not once." She looked up at him, noting the faint lines that age, or centuries, had not eroded, even knowing the attention it would bring. "Attention is meaningless," he replied. "People see what they want to see. What matters is how you act when you're being watched." Evelyn nodded slowly. She realized that in the weeks since the cafe incident, she had grown accustomed to being seen, not as invisible, not as a victim, but as someone capable of standing her ground. And yet, Julian Mercer's shadow lingered, a reminder that the world still harbored cruelty. "Do you think he's aware?" she asked quietly, referring to Julian. "He is," Lucas said, "and he will remember." They walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of gravel and the occasional distant honk of a taxi. Evelyn thought about the comment sections, the trolls, the people who had mocked her, and she felt a strange combination of anger and detachment. They were irrelevant. Their cruelty could not touch her here. Not really. Not when her son was alive, healthy, and unashamed. At a quiet bench overlooking the frozen lake, Luca finally spoke again. "Evelyn, you must understand something. The world will always test you. People like Julia Mercer are only the beginning. But if you hold to what you believe, if you stand for dignity and for fairness, you will never be powerless again." Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the chill in her lungs and the weight of his words. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I just want peace. For him, for me, for Jonah. Peace is earned," Lucas said, "and sometimes it is enforced." She turned to him, realizing in that moment that this was not a man content to watch life unfold passively. He was a predator, yes, but his prey was injustice, cruelty, and the arrogance of those who think they can harm others with impunity. And somehow, despite his terrifying nature, that made him trustworthy. As they walked back toward the car, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a small apartment, humiliated for $5, to this penthouse above Central Park, cradling her son and walking beside a man older than the country itself. The transformation was not just physical or material. It was emotional, psychological, and profound. She felt stronger, safer, and more capable than ever before. Back at the penthouse, she settled Jonah into his crib and sank into a chair by the window. Luca was already there, standing in the shadows, watching the city glow. She finally asked the question she had avoided since the beginning. "Why me?" Luca's gaze met hers, calm, unwavering. "Because you survived," he said. "Because you chose dignity when humiliation was easy. Because you are capable of love and courage in equal measure." Evelyn's lips trembled, and she laughed softly through her tears. That's a lot for one person to live up to. Not for her, Lucas said, nodding toward Jonah. He will inherit strength, and you will teach him what it means to be brave. Outside, the city continued its unrelenting rhythm, indifferent yet somehow aligned with the quiet revolution unfolding in one penthouse. And inside, Evelyn Carter, once mocked for $5, now held the power to shape her life and the lives of others with every choice she made. The world had not changed. She had, and for the first time, she understood that change was everything. The first snow of the season fell over Manhattan, coating rooftops and Central Park trees in a soft, improbable white. From the penthouse, Evelyn watched the flakes drift lazily, like fragile promises suspended in the wind. Jonah slept in his crib, breathing steadily, tiny fists curled, and she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. It had been months since the cafe incident, months of rebuilding, of quiet victories, of standing against cruelty without needing to fight fire with fire. Julian Mercer had disappeared from public attention, his reputation irreparably damaged, a cautionary tale for anyone who believed humiliation was harmless. The foundation she had established with Luca's guidance had already begun to reach hundreds of women. Some had shared their stories publicly. Some preferred to remain anonymous. Every single one carried echoes of her own fear, her own shame, and her own courage. And through it all, Luca had remained a constant presence, never intrusive, always protective. He had never demanded loyalty, blood, or fear. He simply had been there, as guardian and observer, as someone who understood that real power was quiet, precise, and deliberate. Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from being laughed at over $5 to standing firmly in her own dignity. She remembered every stolen glance of contempt, every snicker, every whispered word meant to make her feel small. And now, for the first time, she saw them as fragments of a past that had forged her into someone unshakable. The sound of soft footsteps drew her attention. Luca appeared in the doorway, a cup of tea in his hands, though the gesture was almost ceremonial. He rarely drank, rarely rested, and yet he carried himself with the quiet care of someone fully alive despite centuries of existence. Sleep came easily? He asked. For him, she said, smiling, gesturing to Jonah's crib. For me, I'm still learning. He joined her at the window, placing the tea on the nearby table. The city stretched before them, glittering and indifferent, but here in their penthouse, it felt intimate, contained. It will, Lucas said softly. You have survived more than most will ever know. That knowledge cannot be taken from you. Evelyn took a deep breath, letting the cold winter air fill her lungs. Do you ever get tired of watching injustice? She asked. Of being you? Luca's gaze lingered on the snow. No, he said after a moment. Injustice is predictable. What is rare is courage. What is rare is someone who stands after being humiliated, who takes the smallest acts of cruelty and refuses to let them define her life. That rarity deserves attention, protection, and reverence. Her eyes widened slightly at the word, though she smiled anyway. Reverence seemed strong. Not for him, Lucas said, glancing toward Jonah. For you. For the mother who refused to shrink, even when the world demanded it. Evelyn felt warmth flood through her chest. It wasn't just pride. It wasn't just relief. It was recognition, the validation of every choice, every quiet act of bravery that had brought her here. And it was permanent, not because the world had changed, but because she had. Luca finally looked directly at her, his centuries-old eyes holding an intensity that made the air between them tremble. Do you understand, he said softly, that you are no longer invisible? I do, she whispered. And I like it. Outside, somewhere in the city, people continued to argue, to troll, to judge. Julian Mercer had faded into irrelevance, and others like him would always exist. But their power over her had evaporated. Every sneer, every snicker, every $5 humiliation had been transformed into resilience. Every misstep of the cruel had been cataloged in history. Small victories, quiet but undeniable. Evelyn turned to Luca, a playful spark lighting her eyes. So what now? Do I live happily ever after? Luca's lips curved in a rare, genuine smile. Happily ever after is earned, but you've already begun. You have a child, a home, a purpose, and dignity unshakable. You've taken the first steps toward a life that others might envy but cannot define for you. She laughed softly. I suppose I could get used to this. And you should, Lucas said, his voice quiet but certain. Because the alternative is simply surviving. You've moved beyond that. Now you are thriving. For a long moment, they stood together in silence, watching the snowflakes land on the city like tiny miracles. Jonah stirred in his crib, and Evelyn felt a surge of fierce love she had never known possible. She thought of the women reaching out to the foundation, of the countless lives she could touch, of the person she had become. And she realized something crucial. The world hadn't made her small. No one's cruelty could. She was at last entirely and beautifully her own. Luca reached for her hand, gentle and deliberate, and she took it without hesitation. Do you feel the weight of the past? He asked. Only enough to know it made me stronger, she replied. He nodded, his gaze drifting to Jonah. And the future? Evelyn looked down at her son, the tiny rhythm of his heartbeat steady against her chest. The future is ours, she said firmly. Outside, the city carried on with its chaos and noise. Trolls would continue to type. Cruelty would persist. But here, in this penthouse overlooking Central Park, a pregnant maid once humiliated for $5 had become a mother, a protector, a symbol of strength, and a woman entirely unafraid. And somewhere, in the shadows of centuries, an immortal watched her with pride, knowing, finally, that justice, courage, and love were not just abstract ideals, but living, breathing realities. Evelyn Carter had been humiliated, exposed, and tested. She had survived. And now, with her son in her arms, a foundation taking shape to protect others, and her dignity restored, she had won. As the snow fell silently over Manhattan, one thought echoed in the quiet corners of her mind. She would never apologize for surviving again. And for the first time in centuries, Lucas smiled. Not as a predator, not as a watcher, but as someone who had witnessed a life transformed irrevocably and beautifully against all odds. The world had changed in the smallest, most profound way. One woman had chosen courage, and that choice radiated outward, impossible to contain. Evelyn, once humiliated for $5, now held everything that mattered: love, dignity, power, and the certainty that she was finally free. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, comment, and share. It really helps me reach more amazing people like you. And make sure to subscribe/follow so you don't miss any future videos or live sessions. I'd love to hear from you too, so drop your thoughts or questions in the comments below. Thanks again for being here, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.